Hello, my name is Sherry Marx. I am a teacher at Nevada Rosina High School in Nevada Hills, California, USA. My paper is titled Popular White Teachers of Latina, Latino Kids, the Strengths of Personal Experiences and the Limitations of Whiteness. I decided to conduct this research after years of observing my colleagues' abilities, or lack thereof, to relate to their students. So the main argument for my paper will be answering the question of how does whiteness affect the ability to relate between white teachers and majority Latino students in urban high schools. So when I say whiteness, I mean racism, critical race theory, preconceived notions, colorblindness, and the list goes on. We will dive into that further in the presentation. What is being studied? So in this article, it will be in the context of contemporary schooling. For the research, I chose 4 veteran teachers. They were deemed as successful, well liked by the students and staff. And they had to answer the following questions. So the first one being, what ways can you relate to your students? The second one, what ways can you not relate to your students? And the third one, are you cognizant of your own whiteness and how does it affect your ability to relate to your students? So after conducting the research, I then interpreted through the lenses of critical race theory and critical studies, and then I applied it to the research in the end. I thought it would be helpful to give a little bit of background on the school that these teachers were working at. So Nevada Rosina High School is located in Nevada Hills, California. It was deemed a continuation high school, which meant it was a school for students that are deemed at risk of not completing their schooling. It placed an emphasis on vocational or career goals. At NRHS, the majority demographic was of students that had severe problems with absenteeism because of things such as pregnancy, being young parents, time spent incarcerated, high family mobility, or the death of a family member. The school was situated in a high traffic and dusty area and was a collection of portable buildings which were promised to be fixed up for over 10 years. So it's evident that the funding within the division was quite a problem. It was explained, though, that the grounds were very well kept, so it was a lovely looking school, which is nice. All right, so who is being studied? Reflecting on the demographics of the district, Latinos accounted for about 77% of the student body, African Americans made up 9%, and white students comprised 14%. About half of all students had been in English language development classes at some point in their school career. In contrast, all teachers and administrators, except for one African American assistant principal who worked at NRHS, for just the year of this study, were white and none spoke more than a few words of Spanish. The only 2 school employees who spoke Spanish were the part-time bilingual resource aide and the custodian. Both were native speakers. At the time of this study, there were no novice teachers at NRHS. Rather, the teachers averaged about 20 years of experience. All were certified in their subject areas, and most had master degrees, some had even having 2. And a lot of them had attended advanced training sessions in their various subject areas. Several had been specifically recruited by the NRHS principal from other schools in the district because of their excellent reputations. The 4 teachers that were studied in depth were all female, well-liked, successful, award-winning teachers. They had extensive experience teaching Latina, Latino, and African American students. So the people chose were Rose Green, Nikki Starr, Jane Alexander, and Mickey Curry. All right, so the methodologies used in this research. So I started out with data collection, surveying the students, administrators, and office staff, asking them which teachers they thought related well to students. So after compiling the answers, I chose Nikki Starr, Mickey Curry, Jane Alexander, and Rose Green. Next came the interviewing process. Twice over several month periods, I got together with the said teachers and asked them the 3 questions about how they could relate to students, how they could not relate to students, and if they were cognizant of their own whiteness and how it influenced their ability to relate to students. Next, I took observational notes. I observed their class twice over the extent of this research. And despite all the data gathered, It was the stories gained from interviews that were most informative. They're the central focus of this study. The stories contextualized within the personal and professional lives of the four teachers. It was both fascinating and very revealing. All right, so frameworks I used. As I represented the stories of these teachers in this article, I sought to share the juice of the lived experience by using many long quotes from teachers and by retelling their stories in narrative form. I do this not only to entertain the reader, but to demonstrate an important component of critical race theory methodology, which is presenting the stories of others in narrative that is accessible to readers from a wide variety of backgrounds. The racial and ethnic experiences of whites and other non-minorities can be an important part of the discussion and analysis of the advantages and privileges of being white in the USA. The stories shared by the teachers in this study are very revealing concerning the interplay of race and racism in the ways they thought about their students of color. So, in organizing the narrative of this study, I begin with personal descriptions and life histories of each woman I studied. This included comments the students made about them, and then I follow it with their own stories that illuminate the three essential questions in the study, which is how they can relate to their students, how they cannot, and then how they feel their whiteness influence their ability to do so. I then follow this with an analysis section where I interpret their answers. Although I offer these analyses after the stories, readers are invited to make their own interpretations and generalizations based on their own life experiences and their abilities to relate to the stories shared. All right, so the key findings of this study. The research found that the teachers could relate through instability and personal challenges. It was clear that the personal life experiences of these teachers and their abilities to use these experiences as ways to connect to the students were tremendously valuable. As the literature suggests, this ability to relate seemed to contribute to students' motivation to come to school as well as their enjoyment of school. Things such as living a transient life or having their parents go through a divorce were really the only challenges mentioned by the teachers studied. The research also found that teachers could not relate because of violence, gang activities, and racial segregation, deficit thoughts about people of color, lack of regard for education, lack of respect for women and girls, simplified understanding of students and people of color, colorblindness. At the same time, as all teachers admitted, there were many ways in which they could not relate to their students. All of these were connected obviously or subtly to race. Indeed, as the stories illustrated in the research illustrates, aspects of teachers' own white identities were revealed as they talked about the ways they could not relate to students. At the same time, when they articulated their thoughts about whiteness, the differences they perceived between themselves and their students were illuminated. And the third finding was they were not cognizant of their whiteness, which further impeded on their own ability to relate to their students. So, some concluding thoughts. Although they were able to lovingly and successfully teach their students, relating to them through personal experiences, they were not able to relate to students' experiences as racial and cultural beings, and they greatly misunderstood their students because of this. If we adopt the critical race theory perspective that racism is an institutionalized system of advantage that privileges whites as it disadvantages people of color, and the critical race theory and critical studies in whiteness tenet that all whites are advantaged by whiteness and racism, no matter their intentions, then we have to expect that all white people, including white teachers, such as those presented here, are influenced by racism. Some are better able to work against these influences than others. As I reflect on the findings, I find a conundrum. The teachers represented in this article were exemplary in many ways. Their students admired them greatly. However, just a few pointed questions revealed the many ways they were unable to relate to their students of color and the many ways that racism influenced their misperceptions of these students. Although they emphasized that the racial and cultural differences between themselves and their students did not matter, in the end, one has to wonder if that really can be true. What would the parents of the NRHS students think about the stories shared in this article? Would they reassess any thoughts they might have about these teachers being able to work with their children? Would they still feel that their children are being cared about in school? What would NRHS students say if they read these findings? Would they still feel their teachers could relate to them?
Would they wonder if having no teachers of color in their school might be having an impact on them? One can only speculate and call for further research that would delve into questions such as these. In the meantime, the seriousness of the predominance of whites in this profession of education and its necessary limitations must give us all food for thought. What would we say if these were our own children we were talking about?